This is Fantology.
You may have heard of us.
All right, what's up, biters? This is Steven, your host with Fantology Podcast. I have my lifelong friend Jake here, and we are talking about The Daughter's War by Christopher Buehlman. This is a prequel in the same world as The Blacktongue Thief, which came out, I want to say, like 2 to 4 years ago. It's been a little bit, and we read that one pretty close to when it came out. I think we kind of got on the hype train for that one, and it was a fun book. And this one was, we saw this one coming up, and same author, same world. We're interested. We're a little bit behind. It came out, I want to say a few months ago.
Few
So
months, yeah.
maybe some have already read it, but nonetheless, here is our review. We're going to start with some no spoilers in case you're interested in the series, and then we'll transition over into actual plot things.
Who did you review Blacktongue Thief with? That was yeah, at least a couple years ago.
It's a while ago.
Was that with the
I don't
full
know.
crew?
It sounds like you were not there.
I was not on it because I when I heard that Daughter's War was coming out, I was like, oh, I should read Blacktongue Thief. Even though it is a prequel, I thought I should read it just to get a like more context. And I didn't get too far in it before my library loan had to be returned. But yeah, so I haven't actually read Blacktongue Thief, which I think will be an interesting
Okay.
point to our review here.
Yeah, because I read it. It's been a little bit, and honestly, I just remember kind of like vagaries of
Mhm.
what happened. And I wish I remembered more because I wish I was able to make more connections between what happened in the Daughters' War and what happened in the Blacktongue Thief, because I feel like there were a lot of not Easter eggs, but like subtle connections between the two stories that it just like felt like some things I should have picked up on, but since it's been a while, I didn't. And so,
Mhm.
that's always kind of a struggle with books that come out after some time has passed. It would have been nice if I had been able to reread that one sooner, but it is what it is.
Yeah, one thing that I thought, as someone who hasn't really read Blacktongue Thief, like I got, um, this isn't a spoiler to Blacktongue Thief at all. There's a tower near the beginning of the story, and that's as far as I got.
Mhm.
So very, very in the beginning. But I assumed something like the Daughter's War is framed where Galva is like writing. I don't know if she's like writing a diary or letters to somebody, but she's writing the story to someone, for a
Mhm.
specific person to read. That isn't herself. And I assumed that that would be, if I had read Blacktongue Thief, I would know who that was. Did that feel like the case for you?
Not that I remember.
Okay.
I think it was just a first person story. And yeah, the style of the Daughters' War was we're recollecting on the events years later. And there's some writings, there's some things that are kind of glossed over, but I don't know that it's necessarily told to a certain character that's introduced later on. I
Oh,
could be
okay.
wrong. I mean,
Okay.
it's like I said, it's been a bit, and I don't
Yeah.
remember everything that happened in Black Tongue Thief, but I did not get that sense.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's one of those things I just assumed like, oh, if I had read this, since this is a prequel, this would have been like uh known, because there are things like in it where they say you already know what happened here, so I'm going to skip over it. Uh but
Hmm.
anyways, yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I will say it from the get-go, I having not read Blacktongue Thief, I really enjoyed The Daughter's War. I don't For my enjoyment, I did not need to have any context into the world apart from what is given within the book itself.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because whenever you get into a series, people wonder, right, what's the right
Mhm.
entry point? And I think you could read either book first.
Yeah, especially with prequels that come out later, because they're obviously colored by what has already come out to a degree. And so like I would say if you read New Spring before The Eye of the World in the Wheel of Time series, that would be a mistake. Like that you would ruin some plot tension and um some of the things that are revealed later on. But I did feel like it didn't seem like that to be the case here. I don't know if this spoils Blacktongue Thief at all. I will say, from the little I did read of Blacktongue Thief, this is like tonally completely different.
Yeah.
This is very much like a war book, as in like a not like an action war book. There is some good action in it, but it's like a war sucks kind of book. And it almost has like tinges of horror in it, I'd say, which
Mhm.
looking into it, I guess Christopher Buehlman has written some horror, and this has honestly made me want to read some of that. So
Yeah, very different tones between the two. And
mhm.
surprising to me because I did not realize that that was going to be the case going into this book. I
Yeah.
assumed, I mean, I guess I could have kind of figured that out if I read the blurb and realized, like, okay, this is going to be focused more on Galva and Kinch is like not even, I don't know, not a big
I don't,
part, right?
yeah.
Um, so I could have probably pieced that together. Anyway, I started reading and I was like, wow, okay, this is different. It's in the same world and it's 10 to 20 years beforehand, but the events of the world, I feel like you're just introduced to the world in a very different way. Because if I remember, I think both books kind of give similar like breakdowns of the past history with the goblins. Obviously, you're a little bit
Yeah.
further into the timeline in the Blacktongue Thief, so you're already going to know the events. That's why when those times where she says like you already know what's happened here, it's because you kind of already know from what's been explained
Mm.
in the future book. But you get a lot more detail in the events of the previous wars. Obviously, you get more detail on the Daughters' War, but then also like the Threshers' War and the Knights' War that precluded
Yeah.
the events of this one. And that stuff is like the wars and the things that have happened with the goblins and the kind and everything like that stuff is all really interesting and really well explained. And I would like I really enjoyed learning more about those things because if I remember right, I think it's kind of explained, but not it's not nearly the focus of the
Hmm.
Blacktongue Thief. That one's more this like adventure with this happy-go-lucky type thief guy who that type of vibe. Here, like you said, it's very dark, it's very somber, it's very
Yeah. Very
much
somber.
like
Yeah.
it's being told from a perspective of this stuff has already happened. And so you know right away from page
Hmm.
one that this is not a happy story. It's not going to be a happy ending. A lot of bad things are going to happen. She doesn't hide really who's going to live, who's going to die. And there's not a whole lot of like big surprises or plot twists in that. Events are
Hmm.
just kind of laid out. And I think the reason why it works is it's you know what's going to happen. It's just kind of like the dramatic tension of like we're in this bad situation, doom is coming, and how's it going to work? It's like when they're in the mines of Moria in Lord of the Rings, and they've just what Pippin or Merry, whichever one of them, just
Pippin. Yeah.
knocked
Little of a took.
the skeleton into the well, and the goblins are coming, and the drums are like doom is coming,
Yeah.
something bad is going to happen, and it's just a matter of like how is it going to play out.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a really good sense of foreboding with that. Like it felt more similar, like very similar to I feel like a World War II movie, or like a D-Day movie where you
Yeah.
just know so many people are gonna die. Like like the chances of survival are just so low. Like there's this huge threat that is like people are being conscripted into and like to fight, and you just know like this is like the last like leg of a last ditch effort to repel them. I agree. I love the world building with like the Knights War, and then learning like how that transitioned to the Threshers War, and then to now the Daughters War. Like getting more details into like how those things developed. I thought it was like really well fleshed out, and similarly, I'd like to learn more about that, and I assume he has more to write in this world, um,
Yeah, I
based
don't
off of
know
these two books.
exactly what the future plans are. I mean, I would have
Mhm.
assumed that the next logical step in this world is go, do a sequel, go forward in time, go forward in time. But
Yeah,
I guess, maybe this was a story that just got developed and he liked it and he went with it. I haven't really dug too deep into it. I'm sure that information is out there somewhere. But from
yeah,
here, I mean, this story is told.
hmm
So now it seems like if there's going to be more, it would be going forward in
forward in
time
time.
in the
Yeah,
Blacktongue Thief. And that
yeah,
would definitely trigger a reread of Blacktongue Thief for me.
yeah. I could see them going like I could see him telling stories in the different wars periods, but I don't think we need a Knight's War book or a Thresher's War book. I think it'd be more interesting if it was a completely original like story adventure that just happened to take place during that time. That would be great. Whereas the Daughter's War is like there is a story happening, but it's very much like a recount of the Daughter's War. Um,
Mhm.
so I don't think we would need that same sort of retelling of those other wars, but I would love if there was a story during that time period if he happened to go backwards in time. I do want to finish Blacktongue Thief now. How would you compare the two in terms of just quality enjoyment? Um,
Blacktongue Thief is more enjoyable. It's like
more,
we said that the
yeah,
tone is totally different. It's humorous throughout.
yeah,
There's there's a little bit of humor. It's just more like gallows humor in the
mhm,
Daughter's War, but the whole thing is very funny. It's it's just kind of like an adventure. It's like a D&D campaign almost adventure where your
mhm,
protagonist is a thief that doesn't really have things planned out super well and just kind of stumbles from thing to thing, and we follow along, and part of the enjoyment is just like, okay, how is this one gonna work out and where are they gonna go from here? And so it was an enjoyable, just kind of a delightful book to read. There were certainly still some darkness to it because we are still in this like world where the goblins are this like nasty, horrible threat, but also it's dark and that, most of the people around kind of stink too. And there's kind of this element in the Daughter's War where it's like the goblins are these evil, terrible monsters, but at the
really
same
alien.
time,
Yeah,
yeah, it's like, but also like humans are
mhm,
equally evil to and mean to each other. And if the goblins weren't there, would there really be as much of a difference because humans are just as it kind of, that kind of balance
yeah,
between the two races is, gives maybe like pause for a little bit of introspection.
yeah. Definitely in the Daughters were like the goblins are like an existential threat and they have that otherness to them, but enough of a similarity to like make it in that like uncanny valley and like really eerie. But like you're saying, them being an existential threat, they weren't always the main like antagonistic force through like the character arc and
Mm-hmm.
motivations in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, that's interesting you say the Black Knight Thief was more enjoyable to read. I got sucked into the Daughter's War, I think, faster than the little I read of Blacktongue Thief. And I think for me it was like the somberness and like there's I feel like there was a bigger hit of world building right from the get-go. Like
Mm-hmm.
the under like descriptions of the goblins and like what kind of threat they are. I do understand the like the enjoyment piece though. Like this was
Yeah.
some
Like
pretty
how
low.
like you can like two things, but one of them
Yeah,
you can like them for different reasons, and one's gonna bring you like
yeah,
more uh I don't know, happiness.
yeah. I feel like I've had this conversation about like movies and oh yeah, it was when we were talking about after we saw Dune Part Two. Like,
Mm.
or is it like was this
And
as
we
good
were,
as Lord of the Rings?
yeah,
I
with
don't.
Thomas. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Lord of the Rings is definitely more of that. Like, I could watch Lord of the Rings at any time. Always in the mood for Lord of the Rings. Like, there's like I would never be disappointed. Whereas like Dune is much more of a uh I'm not really feeling it right now. Not, and it's not because I don't think it's good. Um, and I do like Lord of the Rings more, but it's just you have to be in the right mood. And again, not to compare that Dune's tone is the same as the Daughters War, but just a um, similar idea that I could understand why you would bounce off the Daughters War, or having read it and liked it, be like, I don't need to read that again, you know. And not with nothing to do with the quality, but just um the escapism you get out of it, I guess. You don't always want to
Yeah.
escape into a dire situation. But yeah.
Yeah, well said. And also, if you're listening, the audio of the Daughters War really like adds a lot to that vibe because the
Yeah.
whole thing is just in this like mournful tone.
Yeah, and I again, I think for both narrators, they must have been done by the same like audio company. But I thought it was interesting they sing. Like when there's songs in
Oh
like
yeah, yeah, there is singing.
song parts, they actually sing it. Like both in Blacktongue Thief and in The Daughters War.
So the author actually narrates the Blacktongue Thief.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And he's an American, but he has this like awesome Irish accent in that book.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Did you guys interview him as well?
No, no, we never did. But I remember doing a little bit of research on him. I think he has
Mhm.
like a comedy background and he
That makes sense.
lives in Florida or something. Anyway, just some random facts. But I
Yeah.
was just fascinated that he was able to narrate his own book so well
Yeah,
because
it sounded really well done.
yeah, it sounds super authentic.
Yeah. Um, other I guess I think the tone could be a pro or a con. I think the pro aspect of it like really added to the mood of the book and the like
hmm
the seriousness, but the con being what we discussed, like it's not always the most enjoyable to read.
Yeah, and some people just don't like these types of books. Like some
Yeah,
people prefer a little bit more. They don't want to escape into the void, as
yeah,
you said, and they're just going to be
yeah,
like, "This sucks. I don't want to read this book." And I mean, to each their own, right? Like that's just something that I think people should be aware of.
yeah. I guess diving a little more into the details of the pros and cons for me, I will say the world building, like across the board, was one of the strongest pros in terms of like the history, which we kind of talked about. Like you get a really good understanding of like for as little as we're like actually talking about world building, I think it's used really efficiently to understand like
Yeah.
the general idea of what nations exist, what's the state of them, and like this like the history with the Goblin Wars. And like I think it is helpful with the nations that they're basically like calques of medieval nations of themselves. Like the
hmm
main character is basically from an Iberian kingdom of some sort.
Yeah.
And then
That helps you get a more natural understanding of like, okay,
yeah,
this one is Spain, this one is Italy, this one is, they're just kind
like
of like,
France. I
yeah,
interpreted Gallard to be France, and then wherever the Blacktongue Thief guy is from is basically Ireland or the UK or something.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but I think like it doesn't come across as a cheap, just like, okay, here's your Spain, here's your France. Like they have enough
yeah, yeah.
of their own flavor to like the naming and the words, like they evoke that society while still having its own
hmm
identity to it. But
And it's not very forgiving to the reader. Like you have to focus and kind of piece
yeah.
together like, okay, this nation did this nation did this. They're kind of over here, they're kind of over here. And so I would definitely say if you're struggling with that, look at the map. That is
Mm.
always helpful
I
in
didn't
these
look at the map.
situations.
That's the hardest thing for audiobooks for me is I never think to look at a map, because I don't.
Mm.
So I didn't look at it, and I will say I don't think the positions of everything were really that necessary to follow in terms of the narrative of the story. But
Yeah, maybe it just depends on like what type of learner
yeah,
you are. I feel like in
yeah,
these situations, I'm often a visual learner. And so if I can
mm,
just piece together like this nation's over here, this one's over here, the Goblin
yeah,
Horde land is down here, that just helps me get a visual idea of what's going on.
For sure. And if you quizzed me on any of that, I'm sure I would fail, but I don't think it got in the way of me enjoying the
Yeah.
story for
Yeah,
what it
that's
was.
fair for sure.
Um, so yeah, I think that part of the world building's done well, but the like cream of the crop of the world building were all the creatures. The corvids themselves, top tier. I've always been kind of fascinated with ravens in general. Like I jokingly will tell Emily, like, I need to find some ravens or crows. And like if you can find yourself in a gift giving exchange with them where like you can train them to give you things uh in order for them to get treats they like. And then they will just like you can just like spiral that to like end up like having them like go fetch things for you that you want.
Oh, can you?
Anyways,
Okay.
yeah. So like if you have a treat there, like something that like on your deck, let's say, from what I've understood is they'll like come and then eat it and then they might bring you something. And then if you reward them for bringing that thing, then they'll be like, "Oh, okay. Like now we're in business." And they'll just like you can like really escalate it.
Hmm.
Um they're also in real life, I've heard they have like the intelligence and emotional intelligence of like a 2-year-old. Like and they're
Okay.
like they throw tantrums like a 2-year-old, and I think you get to see some of that in this of like
Oh yeah, yeah. The
they're
corvids definitely
squabbling.
had
Yeah.
some emotional intelligence. Yeah.
Um anyways, I thought they were just amazing in all aspects of it, and they're a big focus because they're like she's part of this corvid unit.
Hmm.
And the corvids, for those who don't know anything about this, they're basically uh enlarged uh more intelligent ravens that this wizard has been doing sorcery on to try to make them bigger and more used as basically a weapon of war. And so this
Yeah,
unit is this
developed as a goblin
yeah,
counter.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so the main character finds herself in a unit where each person in the unit is paired with two different corvids, and it's basically their maiden voyage into battle
Hmm.
with the birds. And that was just amazingly done on all levels. Like there's great humor with it, great like battles with it, and just like the interpersonal dynamics and like the eeriness that other people who aren't familiar with them felt. Um, and then the goblins themselves, the biters, those were like this is like the one time I've like read goblins in a story and actually felt like dread from them,
Yeah, like
like
when we're saying goblins, like if you're not familiar at all, like these are not just cannon fodder goblins.
yeah, like the goblins in Lord of the Rings can be scary and just that, oh, I'm surrounded by a bunch and I don't like I'm tied up, if you're
Hmm.
Merry and Pippin or whatever, or if you're in like the Mines of Moria and you're like surrounded by a horde of them. But like
Right.
even one goblin in this story is like so unnerving and like I think the thing that like stood out to me the most, like described pretty well, like or like yeah, pretty quickly in the beginning, is just that they like something with the anatomy of their tongue. They can do like a cicada like clicking or something. And like just the way it was described, I was like, okay, these are like basically aliens that are coming to eat and
Hmm.
like basically round up, slaughter, and then like turn into cattle all of humanity for food. But
Yeah, they're very intelligent. They have a completely different well, I mean not different. They have a very well developed society of their own,
mm,
and they have no respect for humanity at all. And they capture them, they treat them like cattle. They when they came
mm,
in and took over parts of the world, they put them under horde law, which meant they would cut their tendons. I don't remember which tendon, but like prevented people
mm,
from being able to like move very quickly. And I mean, these are, yeah, they're basically an alien invasion that's coming over and enslaving
yeah,
humanity. And the fact that the word goblin is used is really like it evokes kind of the 1-1 goblin type thing, but it's not
yeah.
at all. Yeah, yeah,
Nice
it's
magic reference.
they're yeah they're been playing too much Magic lately.
Yeah,
This is a very cool enemy for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, and there's none of like the silliness you get from most portrayals of goblins of like being
Hmm.
these like these wacky like greedy creatures. Like these are just all about as similar they are in like in being a humanoid. I can't remember if the book like how much it goes into it, but it's basically like there's no getting through to them. There's no way to communicate. There's no way for them to really see humanity as another
Right.
sapient creature. It's just they're coming in and like have no mercy in that aspect. And in terms of the fascinating biology world building, it was great. And also in terms of like establishing this huge threat right from the onset, it was really well done. That was probably my favorite thing from the book.
Hmm. Okay, should we go into spoilers?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. All right. If you haven't read yet, we are now starting spoilers. Okay. So plot stuff. I don't know, like what stood out to you? What really like got your interest the
Yeah.
most?
It seems like the plot was like the main plot for uh Galva was her getting to wherever she got with the goddess of death. And I assumed that like that is a crucial part in Blacktongue Thief. It seemed like that was a big part of her arc was like getting to know the goddess of death through, Senta, and then like basically the climax of that journey was uh like accepting like becoming a I don't know what it's called, but like at the end where she has the wizard guy tattoo her and mark her as like a scion of that goddess or something. And then
Mm-hmm.
also her story with her brothers, like the familial story. Like I felt like those were the main two plots that were happening. And I will say it worked really well in this book, but neither one of those plots were like developing as they like in a continuous way. They like happen in bursts, I felt like, which works
Yeah.
really well, I think, for the goddess of death side for sure. Like no matter what book it's in, like I think that's it kind of reminded me of like like the Soldier's Tale and Hyperion, like these random like little like encounters with that, and then it progresses. Um,
Okay.
but I will say, I think for some people, the plot with her brothers could kind of be frustrating in that it like starts and stops and starts and stops and like doesn't have really a through line until probably the last quarter or third of the book.
So you didn't even mention there the plot of the war. Did that was that not
Well,
as yeah.
yeah, I mean the plot of the war is the thing, but I didn't really to me the war just felt more like a backdrop for these things to happen in. And like it was a big part of the theme, but like it wasn't I didn't feel like the war was crucial to Galva's character,
Hmm.
other than how it related to her familiar relationships and her religious affiliation. But
Okay. So you were all in on Galva's character. Did you not care like what's
oh, I
going to
was
happen with the goblins that are like what is the outcome of this thing
yeah,
going to be?
yeah, I mean, I was. I thought that was done really well. But to me, it felt more like that's the framing device for Galva's character arc.
Hmm.
And partly because it ends to some degree positively for humanity, based off of this being a prequel to another series, and how
Yeah.
like and kind of how like her letters or whatever are going. And then also
I mean, I don't
because
know, not necessarily. Like it could have ended with them taking over this region of
yeah,
the
yeah,
world that they're in, and then the fight continues in the sequel.
it could, and maybe for me as someone who had read Blacktongue Thief, it didn't, the little I read of that did not seem like goblins were currently a threat. It felt like they were a threat, but they're not anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was coming from the Daughter's War or from my little context from Blacktongue Thief. I thought the war stuff was really good, and I was equally excited to read on that. I actually was probably more excited to see how that progressed than most of the familial stuff, to be honest. Um, just
Hmm.
because it did have that start and stop, and like it didn't really seem to know what was happening there, other than the tension with her and Migaed or whatever his name is. I'm gonna be really bad with the names, but
You're gonna be better than
um,
me. You actually know Spanish, and I would butcher that.
I don't know. I didn't see how any of them were spelled, so it was just it was me recollecting from 1.75 speed on movies. Um,
Uh-huh.
so like there's that tension from the get-go, and you like know that's gonna go somewhere. But I probably was more excited for the war stuff, and I thought the war stuff was done really well, but I didn't really feel like that was um like the main focus of the book as much as it is the daughter's war. I guess the main focus of Galva's character, um, as much as it is the daughter's war as a book. And I feel like I want to be clear that I didn't think the war aspect was done poorly at all. I thought it was done really well. But I just think in terms of like character arc, it wasn't as much of a focus,
That's fair.
except for how it brought out these other changes in Galva via I can't remember the death goddess's name. Um,
I don't
one
remember
of her
either. It
one of her
sounded a
ravens is
lot.
named after it.
Yeah, yeah. You're right. The Raven has the same name almost.
Delgotha, something like that.
Yeah. Is
So,
Dalgatha the name of the goddess? And yeah, okay.
and they
That's close enough. We're gonna go with that.
something like that.
Yeah.
And they call her Skinny, and that's how like isn't that how like the Raven got the name originally because it was skinny, something like that.
Yeah, we will go
Yeah.
with that. Let us know. As always, let us know if we make mistakes. You can hop in our Discord
Yeah.
or leave comments below.
Um.
Okay. I mean,
Anyways, yeah,
I
yeah,
felt like I was maybe more interested in the outcome of the war than the character. I mean, I was invested in those two plot lines that you mentioned with her and her brothers and her own personal journey. But I was just like really sucked into the like tactics of the goblins and the
hmm
armies here and like what's going to end up happening. And like I said, I'd read the Blacktongue Thief and I kind of remembered that goblins were not a huge part of that book, but I did not remember the details. And if this book had ended and goblins had like conquered that little area, I wouldn't have been surprised. Honestly, I was kind of I don't know if surprise is the right word, but I thought it was interesting that it just ended in kind of this like summation of yeah, we held them and then we bred more corvids and we came in and
and
wiped
then
them
we
off
defeat.
the yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I guess like I guess maybe to some degree maybe I missed the point of the book because since it ended that way, I'm gonna take this to mean that the point of the book was really the personal character arcs that you mentioned.
Yeah, and maybe that's I don't know how much of this I was thinking of while reading it. I was very similar to you, like very sucked into the war stuff in terms of like I was like waiting for the Corvids to get in action, like always excited for that. And like anytime the goblins came, like when that scene with them coming in on the ships, like that was so intense.
Yeah.
And then they kind of just like, all right, we're leaving this place because we're not going to be helpful here. But like anytime the goblins were shown to be a threat, there was a lot of suspense of like, okay, how are they going to get through this? And I thought that
Mhm.
was really well done. But yeah, I guess maybe it is because of how it ended. It didn't seem to be like it's not like you were reading through trying to think like some sort of epic where like the war effort is the main focus. It's not like a Helm's Deep thing where you're like
Mhm.
or I guess Lord of the Rings in general, like you're not reading through a whole conflict of like how are we going to come out victorious and like and all the detail. I was kind of bummed that I guess my the biggest beefs I had with this book were it was slow at parts, like it did meander at parts and didn't
It was
fully
kind of
capture my.
jerky with the
Yeah.
pacing. Yeah.
And I think the action that it did have was great. I would have liked to see the Corvids more, like doing more. Um, I didn't mind that we had a lot of the like, how are we going to maintain these as an army because they need to eat so much and everyone around us is starving. Like I liked that
Mhm.
conflict, but I would have also liked to see them like in battle a lot more. And like you kind of see how they turn the tide. Like they're able to do that song, obviously, which was crucial. But I would have liked to see that put in action more. Um, but and then doing that like woodpecker attack on the troll things, whatever they're called.
Yeah. What are those things called?
The goals, maybe.
Galls?
Galls,
No.
the ghouls.
Yeah,
Some
something like, yeah,
something like that.
something like that.
Basically, in my mind, they were the troll equivalent.
Yeah.
And like that bridge battle was amazing. Like
Yeah.
that felt almost as good as like an Abercrombie uh battle moment. Not
You
as
get like
good, almost as good.
300 vibes from that.
Yeah, definitely 300 vibes. Yeah, for sure. Um, but so yeah, I think that is its weakest part is just like the pacing, starting and stopping. Um, and like sometimes it was like you need those like breaks from the tension. Like I liked exploring the different characters, like with the getting more from her brother's points of view and like the wizard stuff, like that was interesting.
Mm.
And then the like the mage queen, witch queen, whatever she was like it was cool to get like flesh this out more. But it did just seem like there's some parts where like all they were doing was marching for a little bit. But
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it just needed like a little bit more of a defter hand in weaving some of these plot elements together.
mm,
So it wasn't just like, okay, now we're in the goddess of death part. Now we're in a Corvid development part. Now we're in a brothers part. Like maybe each of the parts was just a little bit like more tightly all wound together.
yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like the issue with the pacing is that I feel like it was, and I'm coming up with this like in the moment, so maybe this is completely BS, but it's like it felt kind of like the story itself felt like a short story, and that it's really exploring a single character in this like limited situation in the past where you kind of know where everything ends up. You don't get the full conflict of the war. You know, it's like this little slice in time, which I think short stories or
Hmm.
novellas are really good at. But it's like part of me is like if they could have like shrunk it down to a novella, the pacing would have been great, you know, if you
Mm.
could have, but I don't know what you would have cut is my like issue there. Like I don't think there was like fluff so much as much as when stuff was added to it, it just it didn't maintain that same pacing. But I don't know if that makes any sense to you or whoever's listening to us, but that's kind of how I felt. Like I felt like the story itself like sounds good on paper to be a really good novella, but it was much longer than a novella.
Yeah.
And I think the pacing suffered because of that. But
Like overall, like average length for epic fantasy. I don't
yeah,
remember,
it
maybe
was
like
like 20,
450 pages ish.
yeah, it was like 20 or 30 hours, I think.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that, but that's what I felt like.
It did seem
um,
like, for example, the brothers stuff. Like we
mhm,
care about Amiel because,
mhm.
he's innocent and has got all
Yeah,
these good qualities and Gava loves him and
yeah, he's the little brother. Yeah.
yeah, he's trying to help her out and like get the family shield from the jerk brother. Like
Mhm.
that's a good character for sure. But then we just get like this random chapter where he's drinking this invisibility potion and messing around with
Which
the
was really
wizard. And
fun.
it's like, yeah,
It was
it's
a fun
fun and it's kind
chapter.
of goofy. But then you're just like, okay, like we did all this and he got the shield out of it and brought the shield to her. And eventually this led to,
Well, he didn't.
him
He,
dying and right and like all of this stuff that happened. But like
yeah,
ultimately it doesn't none of that like really affected the main part of the story too much other than she
it
realized
affected
like
her relationship with
this is
Miguel. Yeah.
yeah it affected the brothers relationship, but I don't know, it's just like a lot to get there, and it was like some fun writing but maybe somehow it's rather than just like bursts of okay, this is an Amael letter part.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that threw off some pacing. Again, I'm not saying anything should have been cut at all. Because I really liked each aspect of it. But um I do, yeah. I think Paul kind of, or like the middle brother who's also good, kind of disappeared into it. Um
Hmm.
just because it was like she had a bad brother and then she had good brothers, and like there's clearly difference between her younger and old and Paul,
Right, right.
um
Yeah.
but
He
yeah.
ended up like committing suicide because of everything that happened. And that was kind of
Yeah,
all just
because
like brushed over, like I mean, very tragic end to the whole story, which was no
yeah.
surprise, but uh,
Yeah, because essentially she finds out that Miguel has become a brigand, right? And is like um basically a coward and just praying. Like he is the example of in war, like humans will betray each other, right?
yeah.
That's kind of how I read that. But to save face, like her father wouldn't let that story be told, and instead he was like this glorious like
Hmm.
warrior who fell in battle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then Paul, who was at the time uh I guess with the pragmatist commander lady, um and he had to throw who was actually the hero, right? And
Yeah.
he had to throw her under the bus in order to like adhere to the story that their father made up. And then
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know. It does wrap up pretty quickly, and I don't know how much of that plays into Blacktongue Thief at all. I assume not much because this is really the, the introspection into this character.
Yeah, it really seems like I don't remember. Like I said, I'm probably annoying people with how often I'm saying I don't remember, but
Yeah,
I don't. Uh, but I it does seem like these are two very different stories. Like this is her
yeah,
background, but instead of her explaining all this in the Blacktongue Thief, she's explaining it now here in this book.
yeah. I would imagine like a good next story for her would be exploring the conflict with her father, exploring future relationships with that queen or with maybe the pragmatist. She had a lot of crushes throughout the book, which
Yeah,
I thought was done like pretty well, and like that it was a lot, but it didn't feel like too much. Like, oh man, everyone likes her, or she likes everybody. Like
yeah, yeah.
it felt pretty natural, and
Felt pretty
it did
natural.
add
Yeah.
and it added a lot of like cool ways to explore the world. But yeah, I assume like a good plot would be furthering her devotion to her goddess or the conflict with her father and or both. But I don't know if that's on the horizon. I would love to learn more about that.
I think my favorite action piece was when the goblins came up out of out of the underground back into the sacked city that they were in and
Oh yeah.
sat. Well, I guess it was like kind of sacked at that point, not fully sacked,
Yeah.
but came in and everyone fell into their trap. And
Yeah.
this that was a
The
sense
third
where
army
like,
that everyone wasn't sure
yeah, the
existed.
whole
Yeah.
time you're like, this is just like not where things are not like, it seems too peaceful. It doesn't feel right, and we get these vibes that like something is off, something's going to go wrong, and then finally it happens, and like that tension was navigated really well, and then that whole action piece was also done very well, and you're just like in the thick of this confusion and melee and mayhem, and it was really depicted, I think, very believably, very vividly.
Mhm. Yeah, and going back to like the world building, I loved how you get that little hint with the priest who's like, "Oh, we can't use this area for refugees because there's so many holy relics in there that only us priests can touch." And then right before it's revealed, like as it's revealed that really it's because he's been storing like that space for the goblins to sneak attack from. You see, like it mentions that his eyes have turned yellow, which means like he'd been under the influence of the like the world milk or whatever they called it, like the basically
Hmm.
the poison that the goblins use on humans to make them their mental slaves, essentially. And so that was just that felt like almost like a Stephen King moment of um, tension and horror and just like despair. that was, anyways, the world building was so fascinating. Like it felt so, as much as it felt like very familiar, it had such a unique element to it of like really creative ways to uh flesh out the world. But yeah, I'll say I think the bridge scene was one of the best. The first time we see the the Corvids fight was great when they like because they're kind of untested and then you're not sure like how well they're
Yeah.
doing and they're kind of getting like destroyed and then the song breaks out. I'm pretty bummed that like basically all the Corvids are gone at the end of the like in the present day story. That's where it seems like to me, having just read this, it's like they recruited more, they used those, but then most of those just like ran off into the wilderness, and
Hmm.
then her father had to like kill all but like the breeding pairs because he didn't want anyone who wasn't nobility having power to like rise up, and so it's just like I like I get the use case of it, but it was one of those kind of tropes of here's this great power we had, but we no longer have it. So like we were able to use it and it was cool that we got to use it, but now like it can't be used to solve any more problems in our plot. But
Yeah, along with like the ultimate fate of Paul and some other things, like that was one that was
yeah,
really just kind of like, okay, this is how it all ended up, and you're like, what? Like, really? Like,
yeah,
you want a little more on those things?
yeah. I'm fascinated to know also like does she end up with the pragmatist ever? It sounded like she does at some point based off of the what she had said, or maybe she just was like vibing with her. And then the queen for sure. Like what is happening with the witch queen or
Mhm.
the sorceress queen? But
Doesn't she? Oh, I don't remember what happens at the end. She ends up getting married off to some king somewhere. Is that
yeah,
what happens
I
in
think
order
so. Yeah,
for whatever political reason?
yeah. I liked her monkey. That was a fun recurring moment. Um,
For sure, saddest part of the book was when her other Corvid got killed by Megaid's
oh yeah, yeah,
like henchman or what, like in that whole conflict. What was the name of
yeah,
that one? Like started with a B. It was not the Dolgotha one. It was
yeah, yeah. It was her favorite.
yeah,
I don't remember. I
the
don't know. I don't
lovable
remember.
one. So
Yeah,
sad. Like the other
yeah,
Corvids were like, was he bad? And she's like, no, the kin were bad. And
yeah,
that yeah, that was tough.
yeah, yeah. I really liked it though. It's hard to think of like how I'd rate it though, because I do think like if I were to recommend this to somebody, I feel like I'd have to give a pretty big caveat on the pacing. Um,
Mm,
the tone would be like something I'd mention, but not in a negative way. It would be more just like according to taste. Whereas the pacing, I'd be like, it's worth it to finish it. It has this pacing issue, but
yeah. I would probably tell people like I liked the book. I struggled at times. Like there were definitely times where I kind of bounced off it after reading a bit. But when I got back
yeah,
to it, I was happy that I did. It was well worth reading. So if you struggle a little bit, like keep on going. I think it ends up being a pretty good book. But yeah, I would not just recommend it to anyone. First, you'd have to get a little bit of vibe of what other books
yeah.
they like and what they're open to reading.
Yeah, definitely worth it for the more persistent reader, someone who's okay with the slower time, for some good payoffs, because I think there are some really good payoffs in it.
Mm.
And I think my biggest selling point would just be like the creatures, like are done so well. Like
Yeah.
this
No,
makes me
that's
want
a
to
really
build
good,
a goblin
unique,
deck.
unique selling point, right?
Yeah, like yeah. And it makes me want to have a freaking Corvid. So cool. We went
That's
to the zoo
a
today and looked at some ravens, but
yeah. You
yeah.
scattered out some future, ravens that you could trade with.
Yeah. Well, they're in a cage. But yeah. It's interesting there's
Mm.
ravens at a zoo, but they're all I guess there's like a Utah native exhibit in the zoo and they're basically all animals that need to be rehabilitated for some reason, which I think
Yeah.
most of the animals in the zoo are like that, but these especially. It's like, yeah, this Raven will probably be gone next year because it can like go back out. But
Utah Zoo, it's not the highest budget zoo.
it's decent though. Like you
I
should.
mean,
The
it's
Utah.
good. I've been like, it's not bad.
When's the
It's
last time you've been though? Because they
a
redid
couple of years.
like a
It's
whole.
been, I think, after COVID. I went in maybe 21,
Okay.
22 ish.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think last year is when they put in that Utah exhibit. And it's nice. It's really nice for little kids. Honestly, the zoo is really great for like 1 to 10-year-olds, probably.
Yeah.
Pushing
It's nice
past
to,
that is probably harder.
yeah. Yeah. No, it's fun. Like I went with my nephew and it was fun to like see his
Yeah.
reaction. I've been enough where it's like, I don't know if I'm just like super excited to see the animals myself, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think I'd agree. I'm like stuck between a 7.5 or 8 out of 10 on this one, I think. Where do you find yourself?
Yeah, it's like parts of it were
Parts of it were like
really like
9 out of 10 for
yeah, like
sure.
really good. And then other parts are like
Yeah.
6 out of 10. So
I think the
I guess you
world
just
building was nine
average
out of
it.
10 for me. Yeah, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. You figure out what people like and based off their preferences
Yeah.
alter the rating. I'm gonna try to be a little, honestly, I cop out on most things than just say like, yeah, it was 7.5 out of 10. It was 8 out of 10. Like
Yeah.
most of my ratings are just like average. And I'm gonna say this is a 7 out of 10, which is a little bit
Below.
lower than,
Bl-
but I'm
yeah.
gonna try to be a little more honest. I may throw out in the
Yeah.
future, I may throw out some more sixes, fives even.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna try to make that not be like a total
You're adjusting
condemnation.
your scale. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
widen the scale a bit.
Why have a 1 through 10 if you're only using 7 through 10? You
I
know?
know. And
Yeah.
honestly, I was only using like 7 through 9. And
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, I yeah, I'm conflicted. I definitely liked it more than you did, but I think we agreed on all of the weaknesses it had. Um, I'll say 7.5.
Okay.
We're being conservative on this one.
We
I think
are,
it's definitely worth the read for sure, though.
yeah. No, I feel like I mean, this is weird because I just said I'm gonna stop just giving out sevens because I feel like it's a cop out. But I feel like this one really is like
Yeah.
pretty average in, all of the other books that I've read. So, when you've got books that are just all-time classics for me, those are going to be the 8s and 9s from now on.
Yeah.
And so if you want to get an 8 or a 9, you're going to have to get to that level of my, top 5 series of all time, right? And this doesn't approach that, but it's still worth the read. So it's coming in at a 7.
7. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. All right. If you like what we're doing at Pentology, want to chat with us more, you can drop a comment below. You can also join our Discord, which is a fun place with a bunch of fantasy fans, talk about whatever. You can find the invites to that below in the episode description. And until next time, thanks, Jake. See you later.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.